Hello, ARRL members and QST readers. I'm Dave Kassler, author of the Ask Dave column, with a short video here to expand a little bit upon one of the questions and answers that are in the September QST. That's this issue right here, and the questions have to do with this diagram down here. Here was the question, which came from Ken Faria, NT0Y, and he asked if I could give him a definitive formula that would take average power and convert it to peak power, or vice versa. And the answer is there's no such formula, unless you're dealing with a sine wave. And if that's all you want to transmit, that's CW, that's fine. And you can figure that out fairly interesting. But when you transmit audio, different things happen. In audio engineering, meaning like, putting your audio together for film or television or something like that, there is a interesting feature called compression. Now, the volume of something is the peak volume. It's the highest it can go. But what the compression does is increase the average power. And I'm going to demonstrate that two ways. First, with an oscilloscope, and second, with just the power meter that comes out of the radio. Okay, let me show you the setup. We have the ICOM 7300 right here. Okay, and now I've got this thing set so that you've got RF power is 100 watts, the compression is 0, the mic gain is at 50%. Now normally I would run the RF power at 100 watts and the mic gain at 50%, but the compression is set using the process shown in the owner's manual. Right now compression, it says on, but it's dialed all the way down, so there is no compression. Okay, and then I'm going to use this watt meter. Now this watt meter can check either peak power or average power. Okay, we'll use that. And then I have a little splitter device here called cleanrf.com, which is a variable RF sampler, model RF S2K. And the signal comes along here and goes over to the dummy load, which is the Cantenna. The Cantenna is an old Heathkit dummy load. It's just a 50 ohm resistor embedded in mineral oil. Then the oscilloscope is a Regal DS1054 Zulu, and let me show you what happens. Now I'm going to take the microphone here and just say a few things. And then while I'm doing that, I'm going to turn the compression up and down. What you will find happens, here's what happens in compression. It takes the lower volume peaks in the speech waveform and expands them, but it takes the high peaks and doesn't change them at all. What this does is increase the average power. Okay? It makes the signal sound louder even though it has the same peak envelope power. So let's take a look at this. Hello, I'm Dave Kassler, KE0OG, and I'm transmitting into this, and you can see how high the peaks are. They just about occupy the full amount of the screen. I have no compression. Now I'm going to add in compression. And you'll notice that the average value of the waveform is substantially higher. There's a lot more yellow on that screen. However, you'll notice that the peaks stay the same. So we have the peak envelope power, but much higher average power. I'll turn that down to about 50% where I normally run it, and you can still see that this has a much higher average power than if I do this right here, which gives you power and it hits the peaks, but the average is obviously much less. There is such a thing as too much compression. Okay, so there you go. Now let's take a look at the power meter. First, let's set this power meter on peak. Okay, if we set for peak here, we're peaking out around 100 watts. And obviously we're not peaking when we're not saying anything, but when we say things, we do get a peak power. It's a little bit more than 100 watts, which is fine. Now let's turn it to average. Okay, here is average power without any compression. The average power is remarkably less than the peak envelope power. Now let me turn the compression all the way up and note what happens. Our average power goes all the way up. This makes our signal seem louder on the other end, even though we are not exceeding our limits on peak envelope power. Now I'm over compressing. Let me go back to what I normally compress at right there. And the reason that I compress here at level 5 is because any more compression and you start getting distortion in the signal. But note how this average power kind of comes up to around 50 watts here. But if I turn the compression all the way down, the average power is maybe 20 watts, 25, somewhere in there. We see that the compression changes the average value of the waveform, which you're seeing now, versus no compression, which has less punch, much less punch, versus full compression, which is too much. And we'll go back to 5 for the compression level I normally use. We have a case here where we have clearly shown that there is no fixed relationship between the average value and the peak value. Because of something called compression, we can make the average value higher, which makes our signal sound louder, even though it doesn't go above the PEP limit of 100 watts. Now, there is such a thing as overcompressing. In your instruction manual, there will be very specific instructions for how to set the compression. Now, this will help you with getting through DX contacts, contesting, and so on. I usually use compression all the time because the rig sounds so good with the proper amount of compression that it seems to really help with the QSOs that I do. So there you have it. And until we next meet, 73.